For nearly a decade, American Chopper turned a family welding business in upstate New York into one of the most recognizable names on television. Millions of viewers tuned in every week, not just for the motorcycles, but for the shouting matches, the thrown tools, and the raw family tension that played out in front of the cameras. What audiences didn't fully grasp at the time was that the drama on screen was only a preview of what was coming once the cameras finally stopped rolling. Bankruptcies, lawsuits, addiction, and a fractured family fortune would follow almost every major name connected to Orange County Choppers. Here is what actually happened to them. Paul Tatul Sr. was the face of American Chopper from the moment it premiered on the Discovery Channel in 2002. With his booming voice, thick mustache, and short temper, he became the archetype of the hard-driving boss, and for years it looked like nothing could touch him. He had built Orange County Choppers out of his original welding company, and the show turned it into a brand recognized around the world, with custom bikes made for celebrities and even professional sports franchises. But the business behind the television image was far shakier than it appeared. The custom motorcycle boom that fueled the show's early seasons cooled dramatically after the 2008 financial crash, and demand for expensive, one-off choppers never fully recovered. Orange County Choppers also lost its massive 61,000 square foot New York headquarters after the company could no longer keep up with the debt on the building, and the property was eventually surrendered to its lender and sold at auction for a fraction of what it cost to build. Things came to a head in February 2018, one day before Discovery aired the reboot of American Chopper. Paul Sr. filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and the court filings were brutal. He reported owing roughly 50 creditors just over $1.07 million, monthly income of about $15,000, and monthly expenses close to $12,600, an uncomfortably thin margin for someone once worth millions on paper. He also listed more than $151,000 in back taxes owed to the town of Crawford, New York, along with tens of thousands more in credit card debt and other judgments. His upstate mansion, once featured proudly on the show, went into foreclosure and eventually sold for around $1.5 million, well below what he had hoped to get. The legal troubles kept stacking up. In 2017, his business partner Thomas Derbyshire sued him, alleging that money meant to fund a new television project had been misused, including claims that Paul Sr. delayed filming to go fishing and diverted funds without proper authorization. In 2019, a federal judge held him in contempt of court in a separate dispute with a Corvette customization shop over unpaid bills. That same year, he and his son Michael were sued by a photographer for using copyrighted images in Orange County Choppers merchandise and marketing without permission, a case that ended in a court-ordered judgment of more than $258,000 against him. By 2020, the original New York headquarters was gone for good, and Paul Sr. relocated what remained of the business to Pinellas Park, Florida, where he opened a smaller OCC Roadhouse and museum combining a restaurant, motorcycle displays, and event space. Now in his 70s, he still appears in public, still builds bikes on a smaller scale, and has reportedly reconciled with both of his sons after years of very public conflict. The empire he once ran with total control is gone, but he is still working, just on a much smaller stage. If Paul Sr. was the muscle of Orange County Choppers, Paul Tatul Jr. was widely seen as its creative engine, the one turning rough sketches into motorcycles that looked like rolling sculpture. That creative partnership fell apart in September 2008, when a filmed argument ended with Paul Sr. firing his own son on camera. The fallout extended well beyond the workshop floor. Because Jr. still held a 20% ownership stake in Orange County Choppers, his father tried to force a buyout using an appraisal that valued his son's share at $0, a number that stunned fans and infuriated Jr. The dispute dragged through New York courts for years. A lower court initially sided with Paul Sr., but an appeals court later reversed that ruling in December 2010, finding that the buyout terms in their agreement were never clearly defined and therefore could not be enforced as written. Jr. kept his ownership stake, but the relationship with his father was left in ruins for years afterward. In 2009, Paul Jr. launched his own company, Paul Jr. Designs, relocating operations, and rebuilding a client list that would eventually include major corporate names looking for custom builds. For a while, the new venture thrived on its own reputation, separate from his father's shop. But like the rest of the custom motorcycle industry, Paul Jr. Designs was not immune to a shrinking market and rising costs. As demand for expensive custom builds kept softening industry-wide throughout the 2010s, Jr.'s business faced the same financial pressure, squeezing nearly everyone connected to the original show. Despite the strain, Paul Jr. never stepped away from the craft. Today he continues to run Paul Jr. Designs, taking on select high-end projects and judging industry competitions rather than chasing the volume of work the shop produced during the height of the show's fame. He has spoken publicly about wanting a real relationship with his father rather than another business partnership, and the two have appeared together again in more recent projects, a far cry from the courtroom battles of a decade earlier. Mikey Detool was never a bike builder on the show. Instead, he handled administrative work and, more importantly, played peacemaker between his father and older brother during their frequent blow-ups. Off camera, though, Mikey was fighting a battle fans didn't see coming. He struggled with alcohol addiction that intensified as tensions inside the family business grew. And by the show's sixth season, his role had shrunk noticeably as the situation became harder to manage. Mikey eventually entered rehabilitation to address his addiction, a decision that marked a genuine turning point in his life. He has since spoken openly about that period and about rebuilding his relationship with his family, including his father, who has dealt with his own history around substance issues. The two have since appeared together in public and on social media on notably better terms than the show's most explosive years suggested was possible. Legal trouble found Mikey again in 2019 when photographer Scott Gunnels filed a federal copyright lawsuit against him, his father, and Orange County Choppers. Gunnels alleged that photos he had taken and copyrighted, including one from 2013, were used without permission or payment across merchandise, social media, and promotional material for one of Mikey's own art exhibitions. In February 2020, a federal judge in New York entered a default judgment against all three defendants, ordering them to pay Gunnels more than $258,000, with additional attorney's fees added later that year. Rather than disappear from public life, Mikey rebuilt around creativity instead of television fame. He opened an art gallery to showcase his own paintings, launched a small pasta sauce company, and has continued working in a support role at Orange County Choppers as a social media manager and spokesperson. His story, quieter than his father's or brother's, is arguably the most straightforward recovery story to come out of the entire cast. The Detool family dominated the headlines, but much of the day-to-day work at Orange County Choppers fell to a small group of builders who rarely got the same spotlight. And their post-show paths reveal just how hard the changing motorcycle market hit everyone tied to the brand, not just the family at the center of it. Vinny DiMartino, one of the shop's most respected fabricators, left the company in 2007 after several years on the show, a departure Paul Sr. addressed bluntly on camera by saying employees were replaceable. DiMartino went on to open his own custom shop with a former colleague, but like so many businesses in the space, it struggled once the broader economic downturn hit and demand for high-end custom bikes dried up. He eventually shifted toward general vehicle repair work, trading the spotlight for a steadier, if less glamorous, business. Rick Petco spent well over a decade commuting long distances to work at the shop, appearing in episode after episode, while balancing the demands of the job with life back home. He eventually left the company, returned to a Harley-Davidson dealership role, and later built a small custom business crafting knives and wedding bands, a much quieter second act than his years on national television. Cody Connolly joined the shop as a teenager and became one of the show's youngest recognizable faces. His relationship with the business soured after a legal dispute over the use of his image in a custom motorcycle built around his likeness during his time there. He eventually left the custom bike world altogether and moved into an entirely different line of work, running his own excavation business. Jason Pohl, who joined the design team in the mid-2000s, often found himself the target of criticism from fans who mocked his more futuristic sketches. He stayed with the company through its later, leaner years before eventually moving on and relocating to Florida, where he shifted into design software consulting work far removed from custom motorcycle fabrication. None of the men behind American Chopper walked away from the show's collapse unscathed, and few of them walked away in the direction fans might have expected. A business built on national television fame turned out to be just as vulnerable to market downturns, legal disputes, and family conflict as any other small manufacturing company, maybe even more so given how publicly every argument and decision played out. What's striking looking back is not just how far the empire fell, but how differently each person chose to rebuild once the cameras were gone. Some, like Paul Sr. and Paul Jr., stayed in the business that made them famous, just on a smaller and more sustainable scale. Others, like Mikey and several of the shop's builders, walked away from motorcycles entirely and found stability in work that had nothing to do with the industry that once defined them. American Chopper told a story about building things with your hands and about the cost of doing that alongside family. The years after the show ended told a second story that never made it to air, one about what happens when the cameras leave and the bills, lawsuits, and family fractures are left to be dealt with in real life. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into what really happened after the reality TV cameras stopped rolling.